Okay, so we will start off with the project planning part. Hope my screen is visible for everyone. Just let me know if it's not. All right, perfect. So as you guys already know, we have 4 certification projects. For part 4, we haven't really let you guys know about the database or the backend part yet. We will get to you guys with that very soon. But for now, the description would more be about project 1, 2, and 3. For the backend part of certification project 4, you'll get more details soon. So to start with the certification project 1, the idea of the project planning assignment is so that you guys can make a detailed but not too extensive description of your project or how you want to go about it. The reason behind having this is this will help us help you more, since this will essentially be the last point where you guys will get as much help as you want, because the rest, the coding part, will be up to you completely. So if you have your project plan set up and everything's fine, the coding part will go very smoothly. If not, we'll definitely help you out with that. We'll point you to the right direction so that when you actually start coding, it goes very smoothly. Now, for the first one, as you can see over here, I put a very simple example to write a program that essentially will count all the even numbers up to a user-defined stopping point. So essentially what you have to do is write down a pseudocode for the example that you, or the program that you're making for your project. That's pretty much it. Pseudocodes, if you have questions, we did cover that in one of the previous lectures earlier on. You can definitely take a look at that. But it's pretty simple, very straightforward, just essentially a plan on how you want to go about your program or how you want to go about the code. So it's very simple. We don't want to put on too much work for you guys because you're still doing the assignments and catching up on material as well. So we don't want to make this very extensive. The pseudocode is very important because for any kind of code, to be honest, it's always good practice to have a pseudocode laid out anyways. That way, when you start coding, it goes very smooth. So it's the same process over here. You're essentially just gonna submit the pseudocode. You'll take a look at it, and if we think there's anything that might cause you problems when you're coding, we will let you guys know about that. But that's for certification project 1, which is essentially just the JavaScript application that you're supposed to make. Yeah. 1 second. Just see what the examples were again. Right, your project choices, I believe, were the quiz game, the task list, random code generator, those 3. Yep. So for either of those, you will need a pseudocode kind of like this. Okay. So that's for certification project 1. Moving forward to certification project 2, which will be essentially HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all together. So for this, you will need to submit 2 things. One is definitely the pseudocode that your code will work on, and a UI diagram of how you want to go about designing your project as well. The reason behind having the UI diagram is so that if we see that there could be potential issues or this diagram might create complexity in your code later on, we will let you guys know about that. And the pseudocode is obviously for the code and how it works. If we find anything that might cause problems later on, we will let you know about that as well. So a pseudocode and a UI diagram as well for certification project 2. Again, keeping it very simple. This is to make your lives easier later on, not to add extra workload. Yeah, that's pretty much it for certification project 2. Now, certification project 3. Over here, I have the notes application as an example. You will need to create a component tree like this, or a diagram that essentially shows how you are navigating through your components, and a list of reducers or states that you will use. Reducers and states, you might not even need states depending on how you want to go about your code. But in case for small things, like in this example, we had like a hide or show component. You might have a checkbox that you want to just record if it's checked or not. Any small things you could use a state, but in that case, do mention all this over here on the side and the reducers. So ideally, with the reducers, you would also need to write a small comment on what that reducer is going to do for you. And same for the state. Because having too many states might cause problems later on. We want to get rid of that problem so that it doesn't get too confusing for you guys when you guys actually start coding. And the component tree will let us know whether you have necessary components, and if you have any components that isn't really required and might be confusing when you start adding more stuff to your project, for example, the backend as well, we will let you guys know after looking at it, and you guys can kind of go through and review your plan again before starting your code. Again, this is very important because you'll get all the help you need planning your project, but doing the project itself, we won't be able to help you a lot. You're essentially on your own when you're coding it. But again, a good planning strategy will make your coding much more smooth. So again, this assignment would be, we will upload the assignment soon, but the reason behind this assignment is to help you guys. But this project plan, it's not really the final project plan that you have to follow. This is just so that you guys have a head start on your project, and we can kind of guide you on how to go about it. But if you feel while coding that some things need to be changed, you feel free to do that. There's no restriction on that, but this is just so that we are on the same page and we know what kind of struggles you might face while doing your project. This will help us learn your project better and help you guys more. But yeah, this is not really a final project plan. This is not something that you have to strictly stick by. You can definitely change it case to case basis based on how your code is behaving or how the code actually turns out to be. So yeah, the first thing, like I said over here, Samina, you have a question?
Yeah, so over here when you're saying reducer, so we are using Redux for this.
For project 2, you will have Redux as well. Certification project 2.
So I would say when it comes to Redux, it might be good to plan it without Redux first. Like, remember how, Samina, when we went in the lecture, like I think it was 129, we had some state variables that we defined here. And then we used a different color to represent props, right? And we would represent that as being passed down, right? So We could first, that's actually one thing we'd all recommend, is first to do the plan without Redux, but then after, then you can think about the Redux when that's done. And you can think, okay, so I have those functions. I think there were a few of them that we talked about. I think it was like selector and dispatch. So we can mention, these things can then be planned here once at least that's my recommendation. Once the React app is done, then plan out how you want to incorporate Redux and move these. Then that'll be moved to here, and then you'll be specifically getting state wherever in this component. So having that down, something like this is good. Of course, so Tasneem drew this tree diagram. It's great. With the tree diagram, then when you're adding Redux in, having something like that in. It just makes it easier for you, and it also makes it easier for us to see that.
So the tree diagram is the same as when we do React, right? So this tree will.
Exactly. This is a component tree.
Mhm.
So exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's pretty much, if you think about during our lectures, we did show how to change a regular React app into a Redux app, a React Redux app. So it's kind of similar. You plan out the React part and then kind of think about how to make it simpler with Redux. And definitely a tree diagram like this will help. So
And
yeah.
I think in the slides we also have we've mentioned that please do the React one first and then do the Redux after in the order. Yeah. For each project, the slides for that.
Exactly. So yeah, these are the few things. And one other thing that we would probably need is a diagram as well. Let me clear some of the drawings. Okay. So we would also require a UI diagram, because having a UI diagram also tells us a lot whether these states are needed or not, or if there is an easier way to go about this design with React. So it's better to add something like this as well, a UI diagram. So for certification project 3, you would need 3 things. Okay, you'd need the tree, the UI, the component tree, the states, then a plan on how you change those states into reducers and whatnot. And finally, a UI diagram. So that's about it for certification project 3. So these are what we will require from you in the planning stage. And once we go through those, we will give you a detailed review on what we think about it. And if there are any comments that we have on what kind of changes you should or should not make. Any questions? Yes, Samina.
So basically, because in the project that I was doing, the Weenie project, I used a lot of states. And so we need to give states to only those variables that will actually affect our UI, right? That's basically the concept of having states, so that it is able to, if there's any change, it re-renders the screen, right?
Yes. Also, smaller states could have multiple uses, to be honest. Some require a more broader scale of use and some not that much. So for example, the notes over here, it's very important, and this will be used quite a lot. The buttons, on the other hand, for this, I had a hide or show design. So this would probably not be used as much, but the notes one would be more important. So kind of to vary out which ones are more important when you are changing from state to reducers.
Right, okay.
Any other questions or comments? Or yeah, the other instructors are here as well, if you guys want to add anything to this.
I was just wondering, can we head back to the first certification project? There's just something I think I should mention.
Definitely.
that could be helpful. So this is good. And also one thing, so you know how you guys, so when you're doing the first one, it's like you're taking in user input from the terminal, right? So that is usually, a lot of things can go wrong there. So a good thing to do is you can draw like a little tree diagram, kind of like the UI tree, component tree, but less complicated, where it's like, okay, the user inputs 2, so you do this. So notice here, so this is count all even numbers up to a user-defined stopping point, right? So if we were drawing this in that way, we might identify this as, so this is user inputs some number, x, right? If x is 1, we do this. If x is 2, we do this. If x is 3, right? But notice that it doesn't actually matter in this case, whatever number we input, it will run, up to that number. So already when we start thinking about this, we identify that whatever we're doing here, we're doing some code that is actually the same for each of these. So in the process of drawing this tree, we've already identified, okay, user inputs X, and then we run a function based on X, right? So when you're working on the terminal project, you might have like multiple of these function X, and then this something else happens, right? So this is sort of like a tree to represent the flow of how execution can work in your program. And this is a good way to identify places where you can use functions to handle code that's repeating. Because notice this and this and this, these were all repeating, right? So you could have the same function handle, and eventually the tree simplifies to this, right? So you can use this to sort of plan out the project 1, because project 1 is done in that sort of way. I think another good thing to do with project 1 is first thinking about like, what are all my variables? So here we notice X is 0, right? So X, our first variable, is we need the count. Now in your project, for certification project 1, if you quiz game or quote generator, whichever one you pick, you have to think about it like, what are the variables I'm going to use to store things? What are the data types? Like I need, like, because the learning objectives say that you need to use these data types, right? You need to you can map it onto the learning objectives and see, okay, am I using all the data types it tells me to use? Arrays, objects, string, Boolean, like these, they will all need to be used in some way, or at least vast majority of them. So that it'll be helpful to plan that out. Like, what are the data types being used? Something like this will be really helpful before you start. So submitting something like this, I guess later on, we will release an assignment, a planning assignment with more details on exactly, depending on which one you pick, exactly what sort of format we might want for these. But again, as Tasneem mentioned before, this will save you guys time in the end. It might take a few hours to do this, but it'll save like days of debugging in the long run. So yeah.
Yeah, that's all correct. I also emphasize a lot on the fact that this will be the last line of help for the certification project. So I would suggest get as much help as you can. And the more detailed it is, the easier it is for us to help you and give you a proper direction.
Yeah, this is the only time we'll help you with like exact answers when it comes to your code, like this planning phase, because later on, and obviously you can like change the plan and ask us about that, but later on, like implementation specific things, we can only answer indirectly by using similar examples. So, definitely use this opportunity as much as possible, make your plans as detailed as possible. And so we can give really good feedback.
Yes, Samina, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I hope I'm not repeating something that has already been discussed, but so for those who are doing certification 3, so the expectations for certification 1, they don't have to do those, right? They have to do only the expectations of certification 3 only, or do they have to do 1, 2, and 3, all of those expectations?
Only the project you choose. So if you choose certification project 3, you would be required to put in the planning for the certification project 3. If you choose 1 or 2, you would have to put in the planning for those projects. So you don't have to do all of them. It's only the project that you choose.
Okay, and the requirements that must be given, right? Because this level of work is also expected in certification 3, the one that has been drawn over here.
Yes. So if you check certification project 3 over here, we do have a component tree, which will essentially work as that kind of diagram that Aleem showed earlier. So for React, making that kind of diagram might be pretty complicated, but honestly, if you have it, that's even better. We can probably help you even more, but this is just the minimum that you guys should do in order for us to help you better. Because the component tree really says a lot about how your project is gonna work out or how your code will turn out at the end.
Right.
I would say do the component tree, but don't actually do the other diagram because that other one is only for the terminal thing. Because doing like a code execution flow in a React thing will be maybe too complicated because it'll be like, okay, every function that's running and like the flow for that, it might be a bit too much. So actually, I think what Tasneem made here, this is actually should be ideal for the React one. But of course, putting all the states that you're using, the props, even like the functions that are being passed down as props, like where are the functions being passed down? How are you using them? That's all good.
Okay, so the pseudocode level, do we like in project 3, like do we need to like I understand we can explain all the the props and all the states and the flow, but at a relatively higher level, or we need to go down to all those. That's
So it
just
can be higher level here, but let's
Higher
say, for instance, I have a function create note, right? So presumably my create note function's here. It's probably being passed down to input so that my on-click handler here can run this function. So you could like put it down that when you plan out these functions, create node, maybe there's another one, update node, delete node, right? So these sorts of functions. You can put it here that this function, and you can plan it out that, okay, this function create node. It looks like it's taking an event, right? And there's no output because it doesn't return anything, but like it updates the notes with set notes, right? With some value passed in. So like that type of pseudocode, probably you can even have comments. I think we've put comments in before in our code. Like that level of pseudocode, yes. Like higher level, these are all the functions. Like within this tree, right? You're like, okay, these are all my functions: create, update, delete. And then you can have somewhere else in the document you could reference these functions and what they're doing. And like there should be a picture though in your mind of like, okay, this is my state, and then this function has to update that state wherever it's being called. So probably because the function exists here, you're like, okay, I have to actually pass it down as a prop here. And then in my form here, have my handler. Like that could also be mentioned. And I think that's also good.
Yeah, also if there's a very complex function that you're not too sure about, you can definitely write down a pseudocode for that as well. We'll check it out. We don't have a problem with that. Like I said, this is the bare minimum that we expect because we don't want to put in too much work on this. But then again, like this should be good enough for us to help you. But like I said, more detailed, more better. So if you have a complex function that you're not sure about, adding pseudocodes, And like Aleem mentioned, the props and the states, how they're getting passed on to each component, mentioning those will definitely be much, much better. So yeah, more detailed is more better over here.
So the previous projects that we've done, we've done so many before. We've done the front end, the back end now. But the Redux is the first thing that has been introduced, and that is coming straight into our final project. So over there, if we get stuck, then I hope we'll get that help that is needed. Like bit of a hand holding would be probably needed I'm a little nervous about the Redux part here.
It's gonna be very easy. There's no need to be nervous. Stay confident. You guys know enough to make the project. It should be easy for you guys. The Redux part, if you have all the states laid out properly, turning it into a Redux application won't be that difficult. But like Ali mentioned earlier, we can give you examples that are similar to this to help you out with the concept, or even point you to the correct lecture videos or lecture slides for it. We won't probably help you with the exact code for your project, but we can indirectly help you with the concept.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. But yeah, this will definitely help you guys a lot, like a lot, because having these planned out earlier on, even when you were doing your own projects for project 1, project 2, those also you've seen, like planning it earlier on, definitely, I'm pretty sure it helped you guys later with your code. But again, this isn't the final one. You can definitely change your plan as you go, but having this laid out will be good so that you can picture your application while you're coding. This helps a lot when creating any kind of application, if it's a basic JavaScript application or even a React or just a basic HTML, CSS, JavaScript website. So all this will help you guys a lot. And again, for the concepts that are relatively newer, for example, Redux came straight into the final project. And then we also have MongoDB that's coming on. For those, we try to keep it as simple as possible. It's going to be very easy, I assure you. But in case you run into any issues, any problems, we can definitely help you guys with the concept with a similar example, or maybe an example that's already been done that you're confused about. We can help you with those. And if the concept's clear, you can definitely, for sure, make your code work. But yeah, even for MongoDB, it's pretty easy. It's actually the point of having it in the final project is because it's easier, reduces stress. But yeah, like we said, we can help you indirectly, but probably not directly with the code. Yeah, that's about it for the project planning. And I mean, any questions from you guys is very appreciated over here, because more questions means more answers, which will result in less questions later on. Or we are actually planning on creating a FAQ document, which will be available for you guys as well, so that if you guys have any questions, you can check out that document. If you still have a question, you can definitely ask us. So more questions here means more questions in the FAQ document. So the FAQ document will be based on the questions that we've gotten from you guys through support, even the support email, and through us as well. We will be jotting all those down into a file, and that will be available very soon. Yes, Hannah, you have a question?
Yes, can you go over the choices that you provided in the documentation, like, and explain each one how gonna look like? If that's
Sure.
fine.
I can open up that slide. Just give me a second. So let's start with project 1, 2, and 3. So about the project details, at this point, I think it might feel like I'm kind of just repeating what is given in the slide, because the slides, we've made it very descriptive. But yeah, I can't really give you a proper project plan kind of thingy that is a part of your project.
No, how gonna looks like, not just planning, not how the lay, because I go over it, but just get a bit confused.
Okay, let me share it and you can let me know about your concerns. I can explain that if that is okay with our requirements. Okay, so were you asking about certification project 3?
Yes, like choice 1, for example.
Choice 1, right? You mean, okay, the quiz game. So when you say what it's gonna look like, do you mean like something UI?
Like the the layout of the website gonna be like kind of multiple choice, something like this. It's a quizzes game, and there is a multiple choice question gonna be for each game.
Yes, essentially, I believe. So this says the user should have the option to select which quiz they want to play, and thus the game should support multiple quizzes, with each quiz having multiple questions. So, yeah, ideally, I guess for this, the quizzes could be multiple choice questions. It could be a straight answer as well, depending on how you want to design it, I would say. So that is up to you guys on how you want to create the quizzes. But multiple choice questions is definitely an option.
Because you already mentioned it, like quiz game with multiple choice question, right?
So
Yeah, sorry, Tasneem. Yes, Hannah, it's like this is the requirements. So you can imagine this is the requirements of the assignment, and then you need to translate those into pseudocode or the UI. So like your answer is basically the planning assignment. So each one of you would have a little bit different, let's say, like submission to the planning assignment. But yeah, like those again, those are requirements, and it's up to you how to design. And of course, we will help with the planning. We will just I think it's not gonna be graded like usual. We will grade it with I think you will. I don't know if we decided this yet, but you will like we discussed this. You will basically submit this, and you will discuss this with one of us, like your submission. I mean the assignment.
Okay.
We're very hands-off on the design. I think there's a design slide at the end that like the stuff that we give to you, it's set up in a certain way. Actually, so if you can scroll up to the bottom. Yeah, so like there is a very because React Router is required, like the React Router has been set up to at least look like this somewhat. So there's a home, and I believe there's a contact page. This page is where your app starts. So when someone clicks that, then they go to somewhere where the app starts, and then you'll have to think about like, okay, I'm using React Router. I would say first, actually, probably do it without React Router. Actually, though, it's a tough choice. React Router is there, so probably in your plan when you're planning out your component trees. It's best to think about, okay, how would this be like a router specific design, right? Like, let's say, for instance, let's change the example from quizzes. Let's make it like, like I remember when we were on like a Starbucks website a while back and we were showing router implementation there, there were different Starbucks restaurants on that page, and whichever one a user clicked, it changed the route to be specific to that, right? And then based on that, then we could see on that page, okay, what products were offered at that Starbucks, and then they could click a particular product and then that would be reflected in the route. So that is part of making it use router in that particular way. Now, it's up to you, but how I might do this is before I even implement the router for that, I might just first get it working without router and just see, is my data, am I using like the best representation of data, let's say for the quiz, right? Am I representing quizzes in the best way? Like planning that out, then planning the component tree and doing all of that correctly, while also keeping in the back of my mind, okay, how can I make a router work with this? How can I make it properly render all the quizzes, but also have like routes in there as well? So when I click a quiz, the route changes, right? Kind of like in that Starbucks example.
Yeah.
Also, if any of the other instructors want to add to that.
I mean, yeah, it's the design or how you want to plan out your quizzes. It's pretty open for you guys. However you feel like will be the best way to kind of represent a quiz. So that is up to you. And as for any help with designing or planning, like I said, we can definitely give you a detailed overview or a detailed review about what we think might happen if you go along this path later on after we get your project plan, and we will be discussing it one-on-one with you guys.
Yeah, I think when you draw the wireframe, you don't need to use like fancy tools. You can just use like Google Slides or something like that. Like you can be like, okay, this is my main page, this is how it looks. User clicks this, now it looks like this, right? User clicks this, now it looks like something like this. So you can even do this like before you think about the data. Just thinking about like, what do I want this to look like in the end goal? Then you design the data around that. What is the quiz should it look like to properly represent this? And then you start thinking, because it's almost like then these might become components, right? Like, or at least there are components in them, right? And then you'll have to design your UI tree in a way so that it can be faithfully represented on these wireframes. So like the wireframes, you first build those, and the wireframes are like the end goal. What is it, the final product going to look like when the user does their navigation? And then you start thinking, okay, what data do I need to best represent this final product or to make it possible? Like, how am I representing a quiz? How am I representing these sorts of things? And then you think, okay, what components do I need to fit into this wireframe? And then it's like, okay, then how do I pass the data down? What props am I going to use? What functions am I going to use? But the first step is always would be this first wireframe, because that's what turns the idea that we have in our heads. It turns the idea into the reality. So we make the website then. And then we sort of move forward from there. But this part, I think, is typically done first because we might identify like certain things. It'll make the process a lot easier if we first have this picture as we go through it. Yeah. I think saving and loading was mentioned, like saving, loading from JSON files. So also having that in there, right? Like, okay, user clicks save, user clicks load, what is this going to do? And so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same as, for example, this is like an unrelated example actually, but for example, you could take buildings. Before you start building an actual building, you need a diagram on what it's going to look like. So you think about the final outcome, and then you go into the specifics of how you will build that. Even for any project, to be honest, once the final output or the wireframe is laid out, that's when you can think of what kind of variables or what kind of states you would need to make that work. So like Lee mentioned, having the end product kind of designed, or the wireframe in this case, will help you a lot with creating the component trees.
Because this way, everything is pre-planned before. What state, props, functions, how they're being passed down, so that like we will never be surprised by something later on, ideally, right? Because, and even like when you're in the process of coding these things, I think it was one of the lectures that I showed like you can even set up the whole, and I think there's a lecture where that's done, the whole componentry is set up initially without any data, just blank. But there's console logs and like functions are hooked into event listeners. Like everything is done so that it is functional and connected and we know what's being passed down, but it doesn't do anything. There's no data passed in yet. That's even an approach you can take when you program it. Like you have your component tree, you've decided, okay, this is what my component tree looks like, right? Looks like that. You can pre-make all these components in your actual function, like in your code. You can pre-make all these components. You can make sure it renders. And then you can have console logs. Like maybe you decide, okay, I need an update function here that needs to be passed here. So it's a prop here. It needs to exist here. You can add a console log here in this parent, and then in the child, you can, of course, you have the on click, right? So you can test that before you even have data, before anything is like really at stake. You can test that by just clicking that and then seeing, okay, do I have that console log? And you can, before you do anything, you can set this up almost fully and do all these checks that like, are my event listeners working? Am I properly passing some prop? Like, are all the functions set up in an expected way? And then you can of course you add the data, and then but this way, like these checks are done before anything really is at stake, just to make sure that everything is hooked up correctly. But of course, I mean, you don't need to do this. Like this is just my approach probably to doing something like this, but it's totally up to you. I think though, this is more important, like getting this down, and then of course getting the tree down here. But how you actually code it once you have those things, that's up to you.
A good example could actually be the learning platform that we made in one of our examples. The one that we added ChatGPT API at the end as well. You could take a look at that as well, the slides for those. I believe those are uploaded on Canvas. So you could check that out. Because for that, I think we went through a planning stage as well before we started coding.
Yeah, I think what we can do is in the assignment that we make, that we release on Canvas, we'll find these old lectures and we'll link them there. I think we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, you guys, any questions that you have from the certification projects? It doesn't have to be very code related either. Any kind of questions related to the certification projects you can ask now.
So I see a question, is there slides for project 4? So we're still working on the slides, but if you want to do project 4, for now, just do the project 3, because project 4 is just project 3 plus backend. So very shortly, we need to, of course, we will implement a version of this, and then we'll test the instructions against that, because we want to, adding a backend server database testing, like it's not easy, but we want to provide instructions that will work for your implementation, so they're as clear as possible. So it will take some time to do that, but hopefully by the end of this week, we'll have the project 4 slides out. So it'll be exactly the same as project 3, but then there'll be some extra slides at the end that are just like, okay, once all the things are done, once the front end is done, now you can start building the server in this way. Right, so deadline for submission, I see another question there. So we're still planning that. We'll have a FAQ document out pretty soon. And we'll also send out a set of emails where you can actually, you can declare which project you're working on, and then the requirements are stated as well. Like I think for project 1, you need to do the certification, like for certification project 1, you need to complete the mini games website. So if you're doing that solo, it's just one game. And for to do the certification project 2, you need to do the React app project, which was the I think there were a few options given, but in the email we'll send more details about that, because if you are doing it solo, you only need to implement one feature, and we will say which feature. And then I think for 3, I'll have to double check. Tasneem, does it say in this here what's the requirement for 3? I think it's up to a certain lecture, right? And then there's a particular assignment that is required for this one. Might say it at the top. Yeah. Okay, so sorry, for 3 it's project 2. My bad. So for certification 2, it's just project 1, I believe. We can confirm that in the other slide. But for certificate 3, you need to have that React app thing done. So maybe let's just check the certification 2, because we do have, so these are some requirements there. And let's check this slide. Okay, perfect. So for certificate 2, my apologies, you need to do the mini games website project. I don't think for certificate 1 it's required. Maybe let's just double check that. Certificate project 1. Yeah, it doesn't look like it's required. So for, again, certificate 1, you don't need to do the mini games website. It's only, if you want to do 2, that has to be done. If you want to do certificate 3, then the, it says there up to that lecture, and then the React app. And then certificate 4 is like everything in the course up to where it ends.
Also, like, just to have an idea about the deadline, it would be somewhere around mid-March. So you guys can have that in mind when you plan out your whole project. Again, the deadline's not set yet. We will let you guys know when we create the assignments as well for submission of the projects. But yeah, over there you'll get a final deadline, but just keep in your mind, it could be mid-March.
That's why, like, we aren't really releasing any more mandatory work after, I guess, the assignment that was released this morning. At least I believe the mini project 5, once that's it. There's an optional, I think we'll make the next one optional, which is the security part. But other than that, that's more or less it,
Where's
if I'm
the,
not mistaken.
where are the certification projects mentioned? Because I can't seem to find them.
These should be on a Canvas page.
It's not in the,
There should be a module called certification projects and certification project. So it's that Canvas page. We have the first 4 links. Here, Tasneem, if you can head to that thing, and I'll just, so it's in pages. Okay. I see another question. In case if I choose 4, but I'm not able to complete it, what happens? Okay, so, right. Because 4 is interesting, because 4 is actually the certificate 3 plus the back end. So if you can complete the front end part of it, you'll still get the first 3 certificates, 3, 2, and 1. But this is something we'll have to get back to you, because we'll have to like communicate with all the instructors and also our lead instructor, and we'll then get back to you on that. Okay, I see another one. How about the certificate itself? Is it of good relevance that can significantly increment the curriculum? I'm not sure how to answer that. Do you mean like the project itself, or? I mean, the last certificate project before, when you add the backend, there's actually a component there that is adding security as well, and user tables and like login and authentication. So there's a little bit extra there that is, I guess, it's incrementing the curriculum slightly. I guess one more thing is that these certificate projects are our way to verify knowledge. So this is sort of like, this is the one that it's on this basis that this, as well as the previous requirements as well, that we give the certificate, which has the accreditation on it. So I hope that answered your question.
For the web security part, the authentication, login, those are coming directly into the project, of course, but also, like Lee mentioned earlier, we will have an optional assignment ready for you guys. So in case you are struggling with the concept, you can definitely look into that assignment. We can help you over there properly. And you could just refer to that when you're doing your final project.
Yeah, we're still planning that. We will, we obviously understand like time constraints and how much time is left. So we're going to try to be as fair as possible when it comes to that, to make sure everybody has, I think our sort of metric is we want to make sure everybody has at least 4 weeks to work on the final certification. Okay, so I see another question here. The certificate of the course, can we add it to a resume? Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it is accredited from the Digital Supercluster. So it's a very good accreditation, and it would look great on your resume. Even, some of the projects that we build, like the mini project is an excellent thing to go on your resume. I mean, front end, back end, testing, front end, back end testing as well. Plus you get the, if you do the optional security section, then there's also login and authentication. So having all those on a project that's on your portfolio is really, really good.
Also, for the certificate, I think the government of Canada has also something to do with the final certificate that you'll get. There is a sort of accreditation. I'm not exactly sure of the whole thing, but I believe we mentioned it in the announcement earlier on.
Yeah, there's plenty of time, I think I don't really know. I think, yeah, time constraint wise, I mean, you guys can get started on it now, in terms of planning. There's a lot of time, even if you spend days planning it, slowly, bit by bit, making it, not rushing, as long as you slowly work through it and you plan it a lot, you'll be surprised. Like, it shouldn't take too much time to implement. Yeah.
Are there any changes in timing during Ramadan?
Yes. So for Ramadan, I believe, Tasneem can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's March 10th, right? March 11th?
Yeah, around that.
I think there's some changes we're doing in the amount of hours we'll like have lectures. So I think we'll get back to you on that, but we are going to accommodate for Ramadan.
Okay. Because do keep into consideration the people in Toronto, because if the time extends, if you delay the start of the time and extend it later, then it will impact our iftar as well. So yeah.
I think it's most likely the timing is going to be the same, but or maybe like the starting time will be the same, but less hours.
Okay.
In the morning we used to have like 4 hours, then after that 4 hours, but now we will have 2.5 hours in the morning and 2.5 after that. So yeah, to accommodate everyone, I think we will start at, we didn't confirm, but yeah, we the starting, but yeah, we confirmed the structure. So let's say we start at 9:30, for instance, then we finish at 12. then we would have an hour or half an hour, let's say, or we keep it an hour. Then we will start at 1 and we finish at 2:30, 3:30. So for the Eastern time, this is gonna be 6:30, right?
Yes, you're correct. Yeah, we're still hashing out the details, to be honest.
Yeah.
We will let you guys very soon, but we are taking into consideration both time zones because we have a significant amount of students over here as well. I'm also from the Eastern time zone, so yeah,
I
we
think
will.
that mid-March we'll have less lectures. Like we'll probably have finished almost all the content by then. I think then, we might even have like very open lectures to more time for a certification project. So probably less new material, I think, by that time as well.
Yeah, so yeah, nothing to worry about that. We will take care of it and let you guys know. But for now, I would say start with your planning for the project. Give it a week even if you have to. Take your time with it, because say if we are thinking of a 4-week timeline, if everything's planned out properly in the first week, the rest you can easily finish in the next 3 weeks. So that won't be a problem. But it's good to have the plan laid out properly so that the code won't take as much time. And honestly, if you have planned out everything, for example, in the certification project 3, if everything's planned out, like the states and the props, how you're passing everything, if everything's planned out, coding itself doesn't take much time.
Yeah, also you might adjust like how you like your plan during like when you start at the beginning or after like let's say you reach the half. I think you might adjust, that's okay. But also like I think we mentioned this earlier, when you start coding, be sure that you set up the GitHub environment, like the GitHub let's say cycle that you will follow. So like what's the workflow, the GitHub workflow? How are you going to use the different branches and the commands of pushing and committing and everything? So set up the environment, then start the process.
Right, Yaman actually brought up a very good point. It's very important to have your GitHub set up as well. One thing that you guys could additionally do to that is have checkpoints in your project where you plan on, say, pushing your code into GitHub. Like frequent pushes into GitHub is definitely recommended. But if you fail to do that, it's good to have some checkpoints where I'm done with this. Let me push this code into the GitHub. So having that planned out could also work. And also the frequent pushes into your GitHub repository is also a way of us understanding if the code was completely done by you as well. So that clears some parts from our end as well.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point Tasneem brought up with the commit history, because let's just say it's not good just to have like one commit and be like, okay, final push, right? Like, I mean, first of all, it makes your coding more difficult, right? Because maybe you make a bunch of changes and then you're like, okay, wait, something's not working. So it's good to make frequent commits, because then you can probably identify as soon as where something breaks, and then you can be like, okay, what did my code look like before and what actually broke that? That's one thing. But yeah, as was mentioned, that's partly how we grade you. We're going to look at your commit history, and that's one way we can see that the code is yours. there's like slow, iterative building of a code.
Yeah, so all this will definitely help your project a lot. It will make it much more smooth. If you think of it, these are stuff that are actually done in real life projects as well. Because when you're building a proper project for a client or maybe for your company, this is something that we also do. We essentially plan it out ahead, because when you're collaborating with a lot more people, having that kind of plan set up is very essential. So this will definitely set you up for future projects as well. This will help you with the learning process.
Yeah, when you'll enter industry, you'll find out that unless if you're in like a startup, most of the time it's probably going to be spent in meetings and doing like documents and requirements documents and stuff like that. A lot less time is actually spent coding.
Yeah. So yeah, if you guys have any questions about the certification projects, just let us know in the chat. All of the instructors over here, and we will be happy to help. For questions like Ramadan timing and something that's more logistical, we will talk to everyone, our team, and we will put that on the FAQ doc as well, and you can check it out from there. But anything related to the project, we can definitely answer right away. All right, so assume everyone's clear about the certification projects, about the planning stage, or even any of the instructions that's provided for the examples that we've given in the slides. Yeah, also I wanted to mention that the presentation interview after your final project presentation is done, we've mentioned that we would like to ask you questions about your code and probably make a few changes in it as well. It's not going to be anything complex. It's going to be very simple, something that you've already done, and nothing new. For sure, nothing new. Whatever you've already done, maybe ask you to do it in a separate or maybe a different way, or maybe add a small thing to a component. So it's going to be very simple. It's nothing to worry about. And you will be given multiple questions. So if if you can't really answer a question, we'll ask you another question about it, or maybe some other changes that you could make. So there's nothing to worry about that. No need to be nervous about the project. You guys have done very good so far. All the projects, all the assignments that you've done were very impressive, and we have come a long way. Thank you guys for really following along and working hard. This has been a very extensive course too. So really, hats off to you guys for making it work. So trust yourself. No need to be nervous. Be confident about the final project. It's nothing new. Everything in the final project has been done or covered in the lectures. So be confident with yourself. It will turn out to be great. So a question in the chat: is the presentation going to be in front of the students? No, this one we'll just do in a breakout room. It's not really like a formal presentation like the group presentations that we've done. So for live questions, it would essentially, maybe for React, it could be something like, so you, from the assignments and the projects that you've done so far, it's pretty much going to be like that. Because you remember when we go to breakout rooms and ask questions, it's going to be very similar to that. We'll probably ask you how this function works, or maybe explain how the component is passing down certain variables or functions, or how the relationships work between the components, things like that. Small changes could be maybe change a small functionality. An example of that, actually, I don't have an example like off the top of my head, but the changes are going to be essentially like this, like something small from inside a function maybe. Or maybe you're sending a different variable altogether, or a different state. We can ask that, would this functionality require a state, or is just a variable good enough? Things like that, nothing too complex. Something,
Exactly.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, sorry to sneeze. Like the idea is just to make sure that you understand the code that you written. So it could be like, yeah, as Tasneem mentioned, just following a state. Sorry, yeah, following a state. So what's the state now? What's the state after we click that button? What's the state at the end of rendering, and so on? It could be explain the logic here. So the goal you can put in mind that, like, the goal is to just make sure that you understand the code that you've written.
So I see another question here. After the course, will the lecture records remain available? Absolutely. I don't see any reason why they won't. So for sure, yeah, we can, we can leave the recordings up in that YouTube thing. Absolutely.
So about the changes, one thing that came to my mind, well, again, this would be from like a different example. So think of the Notes app that we created. So one change could possibly be maybe add something, or essentially say for that particular application, we had 3 items being displayed. As far as I remember, we had the title, the note itself, and the name of the author. Maybe we'll ask you to add something to that particular display or to the note. Maybe say add a time it was being, okay, maybe not time again, but the, say, actually this is a tough question, but it's going to be very simple. So for that example, if we talk about it again, so we had title, author, and the note itself. Maybe you add the author's age as well, something like that, nothing big. No, we won't ask you to build a component on spot. That's going to take a lot of time. So it's essentially going to be like this. Like I said, maybe for that particular example, we probably wouldn't ask you to add age of the author, but that could be something. So if you have created that particular component tree, if you have coded it yourself, adding another detail to your note won't be that difficult. It will be essentially following the same process that you did for the notes, the author, the title as well.
Yeah. And yeah, deadline should be sometime in mid-March, but we'll get back to you on the exact date. And again, we will try to be as fair as possible in terms of giving as much time as we can. And you know, even the changes that we ask as well should be pretty straightforward. I think the example was pretty good, like adding a new field might be a change, but like you know, I guess one thing is like if you're also have a backend, then adding a change like that might be, you might not need to do it on the spot, but describing what you would need to do to make that change happen, that might be sufficient as well.
So yeah, I've seen like a few students being very concerned about the questions. It's going to be very easy. Trust me, it's nothing difficult, nothing new, something that you've already done in your code. It's just a proof that you can do it in front of us, or you can explain it in front of us. So essentially, you would probably be repeating something that you've already done, just as a proof that everything was done by you. Because if you did the code, those changes would be something that you can do in a Flash. It's very easy.
And of course, you can use like a lot of the previous code that you've already written and used. So you have the recordings and you have your assignments. So you have a lot of snippets to use. That makes also the process like much easier. So yeah, like you will basically repeat yourself. You will repeat a lot of these steps that you've already did, and maybe the difference with MongoDB, but MongoDB looks like mock API. Like in the beginning, we used mock API. So the only maybe new things for assignment 4 is going to be setting up MongoDB and the Redux, yeah. But otherwise, everything is the same.
Yeah, like Yaman said, you mock API and the idea of how you plan your code based on mock API will work in and make using MongoDB much easier, because then planning the database won't be as difficult because you've already done similar structures before. It's just in a different platform. Think about it like that. But yeah, that's about it for the certification projects. I think it's everything we've provided should be very detailed and sufficient for you guys to work on your projects yourself. But if ever, we are here to answer questions. You can definitely ask us. But yeah, if you guys have any questions right now, it would be great if you could let us know in the chat. But other than that, that's I think about it for this lecture. If any other instructors would like to add anything to that. So yeah, if everything's all good and all set, then I guess we can finish up over here and go into office hours. If you have questions, definitely let us know. You can email to support as well. We can get back to you via email as well. So yeah, definitely let us know. Other than that, I guess that's about it. We can go on a 10-minute break and we'll come back and start the office hours. I'll have the breakout rooms open for you guys. You can raise your hands and ask questions.